And sometimes that's a harsh reality that we have to knock into our heads. What? Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Amber Rose, also known as The Religious Hippie. You can basically follow me on any social media platform, or you can go straight to my website at thereligioushippie.com. As you guys can tell by the title of this video, today we're going to be talking about trusting God, my own journey with it, and hopefully some tips and tricks that will help you guys if you guys are struggling trusting God. Just really quick, I wanted to throw in that I do host a virtual prayer group called the St. Jude Prayer Group, where we pray the rosary on Zoom. We also pray the litany of St. Jude, and then we have some community afterwards. It would be wonderful to have you. You can sign up on my website under the events tab, and you can go to the prayer group tab. It's right there. Really easy to sign up. Check it out. So today we're going to start off talking about my own story. If you guys are familiar with my reversion story, my testimony in general, you guys know that I fell away from the church for about 8 years when I was 11, and then I came back when I was around 19 years old, and then God gave me this ministry. Now, obviously, there were a lot of ups and downs with that. I'll link my testimony in the description below if you want to watch it, but I figured giving you guys a background on my own trust issues with God would help you guys maybe determine where you're at with your journey. So for this, we're going to go back to high school. In high school, I struggled a lot with depression and anxiety. I was bullied a lot in high school because of the way I looked and the way I acted. I was definitely a pick-me girl. I'm not going to lie. I had a lot of issues in high school. And now a lot of the people who I've kind of reconnected with, like from high school, they've told me, they're like, dude, we had no idea any of this was going on. And I was like, yeah, it's kind of crazy how that works, you know? And I was like, yeah, you know, I honestly don't think I even knew what was going on. But in high school, I did not handle any of these situations well. I had major trust issues with people. I always thought there was somebody out to get me. I always thought people were going to stab me in the back. I didn't know who I could trust. Even some of my closest friends, I thought would stab me in the back. And so I didn't completely trust them either. And I would be very defensive if I felt like somebody hurt me. I would get up in their face about it. I was not a very nice person. Even if those friends' intentions were good, I still thought they were out to get me. So I did not trust a lot of people, and those who I did trust, I was still very skeptical about. Now, when I came back into my faith around the age of 19, I was still struggling with those issues, and when I reverted, those issues did not just disappear like some Christian TikTokers like to say that they do. It's like, oh, I gave my life to Jesus and now it's all sunshine and rainbows and unicorns and blah, blah, blah. I want some sunshine and rainbows right now. But it did not get better for me. And actually, in fact, it got worse for a little while. One of the reasons I think I really struggled with trust issues coming back into my faith, and maybe why they got worse while I was navigating this new area of my life, was because I never had to trust in somebody that I could not tangibly touch, see, or talk to. Now, of course, we do have Jesus Christ truly present in the Eucharist, but keep in mind, I was a baby Catholic, okay? I just reverted. At this point, I wasn't cultivating my amazement for the Eucharist or understanding how we can deal with the real presence, because I did struggle with believing Jesus was truly present in the Eucharist. And so that was something that I hadn't really cultivated yet, and so that's why I'm kind of mentioning this here. And while I was reverting back into my faith at this time, nobody else knew I was reverting into my faith except for a couple family members and 2 close friends at the time. They were very supportive, although they were Protestant, so they were still hesitant about it, but they were still very glad that I was finding Christ, even if it wasn't in one of their Protestant denominations. Some thoughts that used to cross my mind were, if I can't even trust people who are physically here with me, how can I trust God, who I can't speak directly to? Now, obviously, we can speak directly to God through prayer, but he speaks to us in whispers, and I had not learned about these things yet. I was honestly kind of afraid to admit that, because to an extent, I knew as a Christian, like, we should be praying, and I was almost embarrassed to admit it, because I knew that I could pray to God, I knew that I could speak to God, but at the same time, I was really grappling with how God could speak to me and how I could hear God's voice. I was so afraid that I would not be able to trust God because of my trust issues, but I realized I had 2 choices. I could either give up or I could try. And I decided to try. And eventually, I learned how to converse with God through prayer and adoration and Mass. And there's actually a wonderful book by St. Alphonsus Liguori called How to Converse with God. I absolutely love this book. Highly, highly suggest it to anyone. It's a really short book. I highly Why do I keep saying that? But I highly suggest it for anyone who might be struggling speaking with God. It's done amazing things for my spiritual life, so I highly suggest it for you guys. So through books like Conversing with God, cultivating my own prayer life and going to adoration and daily mass, I was finally able to cultivate that relationship with God that I so dearly desired. But at the same time, I was so afraid of losing friends and family who disapproved of my reversion. At that time, I had all Protestant friends, many of which were actually hostile towards the church. And I didn't know how to navigate that with them because I didn't want to cause tension or division or drama, but unfortunately that's what ended up unfolding. But at the end of the day, I realized that if these people did not support my walk with Christ, they did not deserve to be a part of my life. And sometimes that's a harsh reality that we need to realize, that sometimes people are not meant to be in our lives forever. During the first few months of my reversion, I was extremely uneducated about my faith, and this made it even more difficult for me to explain to my friends why I went from being really angry at the church and not wanting to be Catholic because it has all these restrictions and everything, to I love Jesus and I'm Catholic, yay, sacraments, confession, mass, Eucharist, woo. Now, many of them would tell me it was just a phase and eventually I would go back to how I was and it's only temporary. But I mean, look at where we're at now. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think it's temporary. At this time, I was also dating a Protestant, and while he tried to be supportive about the faith, he really could not be because he was not Catholic. We would get into arguments about the faith on and off throughout our relationship, and it was really frustrating because I felt like I was doing a really good job of pointing him towards Christ, but he was very stagnant. He didn't try. He didn't want to try. And at the end of the day, we have to realize that we cannot save people. Only Jesus Christ can, but we can plant the seed. However, sometimes we need to let people go and go on their own journey and their own path so that they can find Christ. Sometimes we're not a part of that journey, but we can plant that seed. All right, so let me just summarize that whole messiness for you really quick. I came back into my faith and I did not know anything. I was not educated in my faith at all. I had no Catholic friends, and even though close family supported me in reverting back into the faith, I was losing a lot of friends left and right. I felt like I had nobody I could lean on, and it was a very lonely and isolating time for me. Even though I loved my friends, I felt trapped in those relationships because my priorities changed. I no longer wanted to gossip about the latest celebrity news. I no longer wanted to talk about this one person and how awful she is. I no longer wanted to watch shows like Magic Mike or Supernatural or any of those awful shows. And over time, a lot of things changed. The way I spoke changed. I began maturing and outgrowing my friends. And because of this, we all started kind of drifting away naturally, whereas others, it was more of a blow up. But my want and need for a relationship with God through Catholicism overrode basically every doubt I had. Despite the fact I did not trust God yet, I knew that I wanted that relationship with him and I would have to cultivate that trust with him. And I knew that I would have to gain his trust back because I recognized that I lost God's trust too. The first step in this was repairing the damage to our relationship that I caused by going rogue for about 8 years. That's a lot of damage. And this all started with confession. I went back to confession in the fall of 2019, and even though I did an examination of conscience, I didn't really understand what I was doing because it had been so long since I went last. And this sort of resulted in me going back multiple times for like a few weeks until I was sure that I got all the mortal sins. Once I was finally in a state of grace, I immersed myself in everything Catholic. Not like I didn't do that before I was in a state of grace, but now it was full blown, guys. I purged my closet of crop tops, bikinis, booty shorts, anything immodest. I started reading tons and tons of Catholic literature. I started watching a lot of Catholic YouTubers, EWTN. I started listening to relevant radio. It was really a wonderful time, actually, where I was cultivating this relationship with God and I was learning so much about the faith. The more I grew to know God and the more I learned about God and the way that he works and his personality and everything, the more everything started making sense. After 8 years of suffering, he called me home and now uses my ministry and my story, my testimony, as a tool in his toolbox for evangelization. I was mad at God for so long because I didn't understand why he made me suffer the way that I did. But then it all made sense. Sometimes we need to fall away and come back like the prodigal son to realize and to appreciate what we have. So now I have been reverted for almost 3.5 years, and you might be asking, do you still struggle trusting God? The answer is yes. sometimes, for sure. But I have found ways to work through those issues, and I'm going to share those with you now. Learn about your faith. I cannot stress this one enough. I spent a lot of money on Catholic books. I spent hours on YouTube watching Catholic content creators such as Matt Fradd, Taylor Marshall, and a few other people. And I listened to so many Catholic podcasts, my head probably would have exploded. I don't know how it didn't. I read stories about the saints, and this was so helpful because it helped inspire me in my faith. And I knew that they went through the same things that I went through. They were on this earth. They walked the same streets we walked. They have been in our shoes, and they are our heavenly family. And so reading their stories really helped me to understand what my purpose was and how I can follow in their footsteps and get to heaven one day. As St. John Vianney said, the saints did not begin well, but they ended well. The saints also taught me how to suffer well and how to carry my cross and unite my sufferings with Christ on Calvary and Our Lady of Sorrows, who is also on Calvary. These things were fundamental in my faith journey, especially when I struggled with suffering, losing friends, or just spiritual warfare. There was so much, and the saints really helped me to unite my suffering with Christ. Once I became more confident in my faith, I finally understood how God worked with us and through us. You can't ask for a wife and then sit in your room and do nothing. It takes two. We need to pray like it depends on God, but we need to work like it depends on us. The second thing that really helped is prayer and meditation. Prayer is so important. It's how we communicate with God. How can we expect to have a relationship with somebody that we don't talk to? It doesn't work out. I highly suggest praying the Surrender Novena, especially if you're struggling with trusting God. This is one of the fundamental things that I did throughout the years, and this is something that I probably should implement again. But if you are really struggling with trusting God, consider praying the Surrender Novena. It's done wonders for me. Set a time aside each day to talk to God. Usually I do it in the morning and then in the evening. In the morning, I have my morning offering, and usually I will pray a Divine Mercy Chaplet or 3 Hail Marys. In the evening, I'll usually do an examination of conscience and then a Divine Mercy Chaplet if I don't do the Divine Mercy Chaplet at 3 p.m. So that's usually my little routine, and then sometimes I add more if I want to go to Mass or if I go to adoration. But for the most part, that's my steady prayer schedule. Meditation is also very important. I highly suggest maybe the Lectio Divina, which is meditating on one scripture verse, or you can practice Ignatian meditation by placing yourself in the stories of Christ. The way that we can do this is you can read a Bible story and place yourself in it. Imagine yourself being there. Are you Mary Magdalene? Are you Peter? Are you Paul? Are you at Calvary? What's the temperature? What does the wind feel like? What are people saying? What are you doing? How does the ground feel beneath your feet? These are all a part of Ignatian meditation, so I highly suggest you implement it for at least 15 minutes a day. It is so important that we fill our minds with Christ, because the world is so fast to fill our minds with unholy things, and we need to be very careful about what we let into our minds. Another part of Ignatian meditation is the examine. This is where we'll sit down and we'll reflect on our day, our week, our month, our year, and we'll see how God worked in our lives and has pointed us towards His will, and then we can see where God wants to point us next. The next tip I have for you is to destroy the wall. This isn't politics. It's not what we're talking about. Over the 8 years that I was away from my faith, I felt as though a wall of pride had formed around my heart. I knew that in order to trust God and allow God to come into my heart and into my life, I needed to take that wall apart brick by brick. This meant I had to cultivate the virtue of humility, something that I do still struggle with today, and many people struggle with it. It is not an uncommon virtue to struggle with. I started becoming more self-aware, and I allowed God to take the reins on almost everything. It was really hard at first, but I realized eventually that I just had to do it. Just gotta do it. Whenever I started noticing the wall go up again, whether it was because of spiritual warfare or because of friends or something else going on that I couldn't control, I would just close my eyes and I would repeat the words, "Jesus, I trust in you." Again, it's not easy to give up control or to go against something you've known your whole life or most of your life. However, it is achievable and you can do it. This doesn't mean you won't slip up. It means you won't give up. Binding prayers might also be helpful to you, but make sure that you're in a state of grace when you're saying them. It's really important to remember that you only use the binding prayers on people you have authority over. So you can use the binding prayers on yourself, and if you are a father, you can use the binding prayers on your wife or your children, but the wife cannot use the binding prayers on the father. However, the wife can use the binding prayers on the children. This is because they have natural authority over them due to natural law. So just be very, very careful about that. Make sure you're in a state of grace before using binding prayers, and make sure you only use binding prayers on those you have authority over. My next suggestion is the Divine Mercy Chaplet. If you guys are familiar with my reversion story, you know that the Divine Mercy Chaplet holds a special place in my heart. It's one of the main reasons I reverted back to the faith, and I didn't know it at the time, but if you want to learn more about my reversion story, again, I'll put the video in the description. The words, "Jesus, I trust in you," have made a huge difference in my trust issues with God. At first, it was difficult to implement. When something bad happened, my first inclination was not to turn to God and to pray and ask for strength and help. My first inclination was to be emotional and crazy and weird about it. But over time, I became more self-aware, and I started turning my thoughts and minds towards God when something really started upsetting me, and I started feeling that wall kind of come up around my heart again. Saint Faustina's story also really touched me. The fact that she would run away from home to pursue God's will, and she was homeless. She was only 16. Now that's dedication and trust. I do my best to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet every day, knowing how much He loves us and truly wants to help us and cultivate that relationship with us. I am not perfect at this. I will slip up. I will cause issues. But as long as we don't give up, we are winning. Not everything that I stated in this video is going to work for you the way that it worked for me. However, I hope in some way it does bring you closer to Christ and it helps you cultivate that trust and relationship with Him. With all of that being said, guys, that is it for today's video. I hope you guys learned something, and hopefully this will help cultivate your relationship with Christ. I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Bye! Binding prayers, for those of you, sorry.